Hi, welcome back to A Moment with Marta. So today I want to just talk about some general things about autism, but also some tips on how parents and caregivers and individuals with autism can relay information in a simple way to their community. So the latest statistic that I've seen right now is that autism affects 1 in 41 individuals. And that encompasses people from all walks of life, all genders, all races, all ethnic culture groups, all socioeconomic groups. Basically, you're looking at deficits usually in communication, with socialization, in gross and fine motor skills. Somebody with autism might have a hard time communicating, and so they might do what's called echolalia. They might echo responses or copy or repeat. So instead of saying you're welcome, they might say thank you. And they might even say it in the same tone. It's simply their brain is processing the information differently, and they're using that as their way of being able to communicate. So obviously, we know that they mean you're welcome, but they're just not saying it. They might also gesture or use sign language, use pictures. They could use like tablets or keyboards, or there's numerous ways that somebody could communicate when they're on the spectrum. They might even also, be able to use a word or a phrase, and then you just kind of work with where they're at. You just build on top of it. So the symbol for autism is the puzzle piece. And the reason for that is because everybody on the autism spectrum is unique. No person is alike. And if you think about a puzzle, if you have one puzzle piece, let me see my beautiful necklace that my husband got me. If you only have one puzzle piece, you don't have the full picture of what the puzzle is. And that's the same for people with autism. When you've met one person with autism, you have seen their unique needs, but you have no clue what somebody else with autism might be like. And I have 2 kiddos on the spectrum, and they are polar opposites. Various different needs and different coping mechanisms. So different. So that's just some general information. You also don't want to consider autism just as a straight line like a lot of people tend to do. They might think, oh, high functioning here, low functioning here, and then everyone else somewhere in the middle. You want to think of a spectrum like a rainbow. So, there's any number of things that you might be capable of on the spectrum. Maybe you are incredibly social, but you get really overstimulated in crowds. So when I go into classrooms and I talk about autism, I talk about how your brain is like a computer, and your brain is telling your body what to do after it receives all of the input from your environment. So I talk about, how you have 5 senses: sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell, and that any one or multiple of those senses could be overstimulated based on how the brain processes the information. And to some degree, we all have some sensory issues. I do. When I go out in crowds, I get really claustrophobic. Somebody might be afraid of heights. But it doesn't necessarily impact our ability to live in society the way it does with somebody on the spectrum. So one of the first things that I like to do when I go into a classroom, I go into classrooms to teach little autism lessons from pre-K all the way up to high school. So one of the first things I like to do is I say, okay, I want everybody to clap with me on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3, clap. And I ask, okay, what happened? I told you to clap, what happened? And they're like, we clapped. But it helps them to see, okay, I told you something, you heard it, your brain internalized it, told your hands to clap, and you clapped. Well, somebody with autism, their brain might process that information very differently, and they may or may not be able to clap in that moment. So it gives them a little bit more of a hands-on idea of the way the brain works, one, and also how somebody might process some information differently. Something else that I like to do is, because all of our youth are so familiar with technology, I mean, toddlers are using iPhones better than adults half the time. They all can understand and relate to technology. So I give them examples of things that they can grasp onto. I talk with them about, what happens when you're playing a game and it doesn't work. It doesn't do what you've told it to do. Do you get frustrated? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, well, imagine that your brain as the computer, as the game, that you're instructing it to do something and it doesn't do what you want it to do. Imagine how that would feel. Or maybe I'll talk about how, you're watching something on Netflix and you have issues with buffering, or maybe things get pixelated. And I talk about, what do you think it would feel like to see the world that way? And, they think about it because it's something that's very hands-on, that's very relatable, that's very personal to them, and it allows them to have more empathy and think about what that might be like for an individual on the spectrum. And I explain, look, there's not anything physiologically wrong with your eyes. It is simply the way the brain is processing the information. So those are just some simple tips of things that I like to do when I first am going into a classroom to talk about autism and to teach students, like I said, pre-K all the way up to high school. I do the same thing for all of them. And I just kind of tailor it as appropriate for each age group. But even pre-K kids can get it. They can get the clapping and the following directions. They can get the electronics and things not working like you want it to. So there are really simple ways of being able to explain why somebody might process things differently and how that might affect them. And it just helps give them a little bit more empathy and helps them to maybe relate a little bit better to the individual, but also maybe know how to include them. Not how they can just be a friend to the individual with autism, but how the individual with autism can also be their friend and can contribute to that relationship. So until next time on A Moment with Marta.